So welcome back. Here's the here's the highlight of my week so far. I mean, besides this, of course. So Debbie and I are sitting downstairs, getting ready to watch a show, getting ready to watch a movie. Okay, and I'm in my seat, and she's next to me in her seat. And you know how you sometimes you if you have a phone and your phone buzzes, and then suddenly you think your phone is you feel the phantom phone syndrome. You kind of feel something. So I'm sitting there next to Debbie, and I get this. My phone is buzzing, right? I can feel my phone buzzing in my pocket, and I thought, but then out of the corner of my eye, I realized my phone is over here. So just instinctively, I go reach down to see what is that's buzzing in my pocket, and I pull out a mouse.
Oh, no.
Top that. I jumped up. That's a mouse. Through the thing, and Debbie was not pleased with the moment. She was thanking the Lord that it was me and not her, but it was. So thank you all for coming. Today is April 27th, and it's on this date in 1565 that the first Spanish settlement in the Philippines was settled in Cebu City, which is south of Manila, which started the Spanish occupation of the Philippines. So that in the Philippines you have both a Spanish influence and a U.S. influence, because the U.S. Took it over. Don't make no mistake, it was a takeover. The U.S. took it over. I had a conversation with somebody once who was trying to convince me that no, we rescued them. It's like, no, we took them over and killed 20,000 of them to stay there. But yeah, it was. So there's two great examples. Great, and by great I mean very clear examples of colonialism. One of them is the Spaniards in the Philippines, and the other one is the English in India. They were both there for quite some time and then left. But be that as it may, it was on this date in 1667 that John Milton sold the manuscript for Paradise Lost for £10, which is not a lot of money, considering how well known that book has become. Actually, he sold it for £5. And the author or the publisher said, well, if it goes to a second printing, I'll give you another £5. So he was in dire straits at the time, and so he said, okay, I will take it. So yeah, £10. That's what he sold it for in 1667. About 50 years later, no, over 100 years later, it was on this date in 1773 that the British passed the Tea Act. Okay, now just prediction: this is not going to go over well in towns like Boston, kind of thing. I don't know. I can't remember when it was. It was sometime in the late 20th century, like 1980 or somewhere in there. There was a foundation that collected up money and paid the British back for the tea. Something, yeah. They just, I mean, I don't know who they paid, but it was on this date that they passed the Tea Act. And if any of you have ever had a child take piano lessons, you'll appreciate this one. It was on this date that Beethoven's Für Elise was composed. That's it. So it was on this date that wonderful piece of music was composed. In 1861, U.S. President Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus. Okay, so Abraham Lincoln, good first Republican president, suspended the writ of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is the idea that you have to tell somebody why they're being detained. Okay, why, Latin for having the body. Why did we detain you? And so just to like to point out these moments, if you think that the Republicans won't do stuff like that, well, this is before Bull Run. Okay, this is the Battle of Bull Run, which was the start of the Civil War. This was before the actual start of the war. Okay, so I mean, there had been some secessions, but Lincoln, the Republican president, so I'm just saying, Republicans have not been known to do that kind of stuff. I'm sure they'll never do that again. Speaking of Republicans, it was on this date in 1877 then when the Republican presidential candidate Rutherford B. Hayes, well, actually, I take that back. It was on this date in 1877 that Reconstruction ended. Reconstruction was the federal takeover of the South in order to ensure that the mandates of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were enforced. Slavery, due process, all those things. That ended in 1877 when Rutherford B. Hayes removed the federal troops from the South, and immediately the Jim Crow era began. Well, basically, the white landowners came back in. I say that because that was, now you want to talk about corrupt elections, okay? So whatever you think about any 21st century election, you go back to the election of 1876, and basically this was a deal made with 50, there were 15 electors were chosen out of the electors because they couldn't decide who had won in the electoral college, and so they created this committee of 15, and Rutherford B. Hayes agreed that he would get the Southern electors' vote if he agreed to end the apartheid, or well, it was apartheid, but end the Reconstruction in the South. And so again, immediately began, again, another fine moment in the history of the Republican Party. I'm not picking, well, I guess I am picking on Republicans today, because it was on this date in 1897 that Grant's tomb is dedicated. Now, we could just figure out who's buried there. I'm kidding. So, let's see. In 1959, the last Canadian missionary left the People's Republic of China. The U.S. missionaries had been gone long before. I don't know the name of this missionary, but it was on this date. So that was pretty much the end of Western formal 1959. The end of formal missionary work in China. And there's, of course, interesting stuff coming out of China right now that's pointing out that the church is actually quite huge in China without the formal missionary work. Draw whatever conclusion you want from that. But it's an interesting thing. For some of you, it didn't help my mother, but it was on this date in 1965 that R.C. Duncan patented the Pampers disposable diaper. So some of you can't imagine a child without disposable diapers, but we can. I don't know. And finally, it was on this date in 1989 that Beijing students take over Tiananmen Square in China. So if you've seen the pictures of the kids standing in front of the tank and all that all started today. It took about a week or so for that whole event to take place. So that's it for today. Not a lot of good doctrine. No church councils or anything today, but it was some good stuff. So all right, last week, 2 weeks ago, I hope everybody had a great Easter. But last week, 2 weeks ago, we began talking about David the politician. And we're going to back up and kind of recover some of that material because I want to make sure everybody understands what's going on. So Saul is dead. Okay, Saul is dead. And David, prior to that, has been anointed king by Samuel in front of his family. Okay. And over the course of time, while Samuel is still alive and David is running around as this secretly anointed next king, well, king, actually, I mean, it doesn't necessarily say he's going to be the next king, but he says he is going to be king of Israel. David is accumulating a great reputation. He's accumulating great laud and fame as a great warrior for under Saul. Now that Saul is dead, David knows that he is destined to be the king. And we talked last time about how David is kind of trying to move this forward. And the interesting thing here is you have a situation where it is definitely, we know, there's no question that it is God's will that David become king of Israel. Okay, that's a given. The question is, how is this going to happen? Okay, and so David is being very careful about what he does in making it there. Remember, he's in Ziklag. He finds out that Saul has died because somebody comes and says to him, "Hey, here's the headband, here's the armband, here's the crown. He was dying, I killed him. And so David, to thank the guy for his service, kills him. Has him killed, I guess is more precise. That's an important point because that's going to come back today as we discuss this. And so David knows that he's supposed to become king. And he's very careful in how he's approaching this, or how he's letting this play out. The trouble is, and we'll find this out today, that David unfortunately has, for lack of a better word, friends in low places, or friends that he doesn't really need, who are just helping things along, which kind of interrupts kind of I think the idea that David thought that this was going to be a kind of a seamless event, that the people would ultimately come to him. And another thing, again, this is a narrative. We're dealing with a narrative text here. Okay, so a narrative text simply tells a story. Okay, so we don't want to get too married to the sequence of events to the point where we assume that because this is the way it happened, this is the way it had to happen. Okay, that's not necessarily the case. We don't know that. We know this is how it did happen. But it isn't necessary that all of these people had to die in order for David to become king. Okay, sure, it worked. There's no question about it. It cleared a path for David, but it isn't necessarily so that this is how it had to happen. Okay, so again, we get the assumption when we're looking at narrative text somehow that if it happened and it ended well, then that's God's way of telling you that you do it that way and it's going to end well for you, and that's not necessarily true. Okay, so the best example is when you look at what's her name, Rahab in Joshua, Rahab the harlot. Okay, she lies to the guys, and they escape. Okay, why did they escape? Well, they escaped because Rahab lied. So therefore, and I've been in an ethics class at a Christian college where the teacher went through this explanation of hierarchicalism, and there's different rules and blah 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 blah. And I thought, oh, when you're 18, you're like, yeah, wow, that is deep, And looking back after a few years of going over that passage, it came to the conclusion that those spies escaped because God wanted them to escape. That I believe that Rahab could have stood there and said, yeah, they're right here, and they still would have escaped. Okay, now, I can't prove that, but that's what I believe. But we're going to have an interesting story later on in David's life. It doesn't get a lot of attention, where an almost identical situation happens, where two spies are caught and all of that, and we'll talk about that when we come to it. So, in the beginning of chapter 3, make that the beginning of beginning of chapter 3. Where was I? No. Abner during the war, chapter 3, verse 6. Okay, we have the war between the house of Saul and the house of David. Abner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. So you have Abner, who is the head of Saul's army. He is Saul's cousin, I think, or cousin once removed, something. He's relative. He's part of Saul's family. Okay, and he's the head of the kingdom, or he's the head of the army. He's really the power in Israel. Remember, it says the text says that Abner made Ishbosheth king of Israel. Doesn't say that Ishbosheth went through an election or that everybody came and anointed him. It says Abner made Ishbosheth king. Okay, and Abner, being a powerful, well-known person, was able to do that, had a great amount of influence. Okay, and so there in chapter 3, verse 6, says Abner strengthened his house. Verse 7, now Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, why did you sleep with my father's concubine? Okay, now we talked about this last time, that concubines were basically the property of the king. Okay, again, I'm just a messenger here. Okay, with the property of the king, and to sleep with somebody's concubine was tantamount to taking their property, to asserting ownership over her and whatever accoutrements came with that. Okay, and we're going to see this come back. This idea come back with Absalom, and so it would be a great insult to do that. And Ishbosheth gets it in his head that Abner has slept with one of Saul's concubines, which, in the way the thinking went at the time, would suggest that Abner was claiming the kingship for himself, or that he was as powerful as the king, which, in fact, he probably was. But he's just making it clear. Everybody knows this is good. Now, did he actually do that? Well, we don't know. And I suspect, and my point at the time was that Abner gives an almost violent response to it, that his response is so off the wall that he just turns on Ishbosheth, that he's highly insulted. Okay. Now we don't know, but again, go back to how do we know the level of credibility? That when somebody in a narrative text, the most credible statement is when the narrator tells you something happened. Okay. Now in this text, the narrator is not telling us that Abner slept with this woman. Okay. All the narrator is telling us is that Abner accused him of doing it. Now maybe there's someone that doesn't like Abner. Okay. I know that's hard to believe. I mean, here in the United States, everybody loves everybody in the political world, right? We all love everybody, okay? But back then, it wasn't like that. If you weren't in power, it was like, no, maybe there was somebody that said, how can we get Abner in trouble? It's possible. It's also possible that Abner slept with her and started this, and this is just his way of covering his tracks, okay? But given the power that he had, seriously, Abner, I think, could have just said, yeah, I did. What are you going to do about it? Okay, but so he's so angry, he turns on Ishbosheth and agrees to help David. Okay, and again, we talked about this the last time. So Abner reaches out to David to make a deal, but David has a demand: bring me back Michal, his wife. You remember Michal was the woman who was Saul's daughter, and it's mentioned twice in the text that Michal loved David. Okay, and the important thing there is that is the only time in the Bible where it is mentioned that a woman loves a man. And it's mentioned twice. Okay, Michal is taken away from David by Saul and given to another guy named Paltiel. We don't know the length of time, but David says to Abner, listen, I'll make a deal with you, but I want Michal back. Now, this is a power move on David's part. I don't think there's really a whole lot of love for David, between David and Michal. I mean, David to Michal, whether Michal still loved David or not, I don't know. There's one more scene with them. We'll talk about that a little more coming up. But we just had the scene where Ishbosheth says to Michal, who's his sister, hey, you have to go back to, I'm taking you away from this husband. How she reacts, we don't know. We know that the husband follows crying, and it's Abner who's got to step in and say, go home, not Ishbosheth. Abner is the one that steps in and says, go home. So to make sure his point is understood, David sends his man to Israel. Again, he follows up with Israel. Ishbosheth complies and sends Michal, his sister, over the objections of Paltiel, the husband of Saul, who gave her to after David. Abner confers with the elders of Israel using an extra biblical promise. Abner also confers with the tribes of Benjamin, Saul's tribe as well as his own. Abner reports all this to David, and David treats him like a hero. Okay, now this is about where we left off the last time. Okay, so it's all coming together, right? Everything's working. Abner has seen the light. Abner is a member of Saul's family. Abner has gone and talked to, he's the most powerful person in Israel that we know of. He's gone and talked to everybody in the tribe, the important people in the tribes of Israel. He's gone and talked to everybody, the important people, I should say, in the tribe of Benjamin. He comes back to David and he says, listen, I'm bringing it all. It's all going to come to fruition. It's all going to happen. Okay? Everything is working. Okay? If people would have just stayed out of it, everything would be fine. Kind of thing, So we see here, where am I? Abner spoke to, so then Abner in verse 21, then Abner said to David, let me go at once and assemble all Israel for my lord the king, so that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may rule over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. So David has thrown this big feast for Abner. He's treated him like a hero, but the person that's not there is Joab. Now, Joab is David's nephew. Joab is the counterpart to Abner. Okay, Joab is David's military leader. Okay, Joab has two brothers, Abishai and Asahel. If you remember from a previous story, they met up, they had a battle. It ended up that Abner kills Asahel. Okay, reluctantly, I think, perhaps even accidentally. Okay, it's conceivable that the way it's described kind of weirdly, that it may even be a situation where Abner doesn't realize he's killed him. Okay, it's kind of pushing back and ended up stabbing him and killing him, and it just kind of weirdly described that it's conceivable that he doesn't even realize he killed him. Okay, or at the time he certainly knows he's dead, but Joab hasn't forgotten this. So Joab is Asahel's brother. So Joab comes back. Just then, David's men and Joab returned from a raid and brought with them a great deal of plunder. So David's men are still doing this kind of raiding thing. Okay, this is going to come back a little bit. So this use of raiders, go out there and raid, take a smaller group, go out there and raid that camp, raid that army, do something, grab some plunder, bring it back. This was a great business model at the time. Okay, just go out there, raid, bring back some plunder. Kind of, maybe we should take that. We'll talk about that at the next business meeting. We'll create raiding parties and go over there and bring back some plunder, kind of stuff. But Joab comes back, and he realizes what's happened. Okay, and he had gone in peace. When Joab and all the soldiers with him arrived, he was told that Abner, son of Ner, that is Saul's uncle, had come to the king, and that the king had sent him away, and that he had gone in peace. So 3 times in the text there, it says David had sent Abner away in peace, which is absolutely the opposite of what Joab thought should have been done. So Joab went to the king and said, "What have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why did you let him go? Now he is gone. You know Abner, son of Ner. He came to deceive you and observe your movements and found out everything you are doing." Okay, so, Joab may or may not know about the prophecy, or he probably does, and certainly does, but he refuses to believe that Abner could have changed. And besides, Abner's the guy that killed my brother. How could you believe him? How could you believe anything this guy says? Now, what's ironic about this, or interesting, is that this concept, this little event, reappears later in the book of Kings. In that if you remember the story of Hezekiah, where people come to visit Hezekiah, and Hezekiah just believes him and shows him everything, and then the prophet comes in and says, "What did you do that for?" Okay, so Joab is just doing the same thing that Isaiah, I believe Isaiah is the prophet, is going to come in and tell Hezekiah. What did you do that for? He was just here to see how big your army was. So now, again, is that Joab's real beef with Abner? No, of course it isn't. Abner killed his brother. Okay, this is not something that you just, let bygones be bygones. Okay, so Joab then left David and sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the cistern at Sirah, but David did not know it. Okay, operative word there. David does not know this. Okay, keep in mind, Abner is the most important person in Israel. He is the most powerful person in Israel. Okay, forget about Ishbosheth. Okay, Ishbosheth is only there because of Abner. It's interesting in U.S. politics. Every time there's whoever the president is, you always try. One of the games that writers do is try and figure out who is the brains behind the president. Okay, and there's always, it's this person, it's that person, it's this person, it's this person. Okay, and so there's all these different people throughout history that, this was the guy who was the brains behind the president. Okay, so with George W. Bush, it was Dick Cheney. Okay, so it was the vice president, and with Nixon, it was Bebe Rebozo, kind of thing, and all these different people that this is the brains behind the president. With Truman, it was Clark Clifford. Okay, this is the brains behind the outfit, kind of thing. And so Abner truly is the brains behind it. He's the most important person in Israel. He's the most visible person in Israel. I mean, next to the king, but he's already put himself out in front of all of Israel, all of the leaders of Benjamin and Joab. They brought him back from the cistern, but David did not know it. Now, when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into an inner chamber as if to speak with him privately, and there, to avenge the blood of his brother Asahel, Joab stamped him in the stomach, and he died. Okay, So he doesn't even Abner has every reason, and this is why I kind of think that Abner may not realize that he's killed Asahel. This is in my opinion. You can disagree with me if you want. Okay. But just Abner, oh, sure, you want to go talk to me in a private? No problem, let's go. Certain maybe there's something else that David forgot and you need to tell me, or some other thing. Abner gets him in there and kills him. Okay, murders him. Okay, now we know from a later text, let's see, where am I here? David calls back, a later verse 230 makes it clear that Abishai is involved as well. The other brother is involved in this as well. Okay. So both brothers are involved. Joab is just the one that does the stabbing. Okay, he kills Abner. Okay, this is not a good look for David. The optics are bad. Okay, and it's interesting to see what David does, because it's illustrative of a couple of different things. It's illustrative of David's approach to trying to take over as a king, but it also gives you a little bit of long-term indication of what kind of a person David is. Okay, and it says here, Joab then left David. Later, when David heard about this, he said, and again, I don't know who he's talking to. He says, I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May his blood. So he's gonna curse him, and this is an amazing curse. I mean, as far as curses go, this one is top notch. Okay, I'm just think about this for a minute. This is what you're wishing on this person. Okay. May his blood fall on the head of Joab and on his whole family. May Joab's family never be without somebody who has a running sore or leprosy, or who leans on a crutch, or who fails by the sword, or who lacks food. Yeah, pretty much, It's pretty much covers it all. He's like, I'm going to curse, may this happen. And this is a very public, he's reputing, in the political world, he's distancing himself from Joab. He's counting down this curse on Joab. May Joab's family, he says, may his blood fall. May Joab's family. Now, who is actually a member of Joab's family? Well, closer. David. David's his uncle. So, I mean, I know it's the distant. It's kind of, he's thinking his descendants, but still, it's kind of like he's this is on his wife's family. I mean, can you imagine? How many of you had family over at Easter, or with family at Easter? So if part of your topic of conversation, if you look to your brother or sister and say, I really hope your kids never succeed in anything. Maybe you had that conversation. If you did, I'm sorry, okay? But that's essentially what he's doing. He's pointing to his sister's family and his nephew and said, man, I hope nothing but bad things follows you your whole life, okay? So when, later verse, David calls back, David distances himself from the event, calling down a curse on Joab and Joab's family. Now here's verse 30. Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in the battle at Gibeon. Okay. This little parenthetical addition here is just to make sure everybody is clear that Abishai is involved in this. Okay. So then David said to Joab and all the people with him, tear your clothes and put on sackcloths and walk in mourning in front of Abner. He's telling this to Joab, the guy who just killed him. Okay, you need to do all of this kind of stuff. So David makes Joab publicly mourn for Abner, despite the fact that he just killed him. That it's pretty clear how he feels about Abner. But David says you have to deal with this. You have to publicly mourn for Abner. King David himself walked behind the bier. Okay, again, this is a big public funeral. Okay, has anybody been following the funeral of Pope Francis? With all the people lining up and all of that, and big stuff, and lots of parades and people lining up and waiting for days and days, kind of stuff. I mean, it's a big public thing. Okay, when the Pope dies, it's like a big public thing, and so that he's making this a big public thing, and to show how sad David is about the death of Abner. He wants everybody to know that this is crushing to me. All the people wept also. The king sang this lament for Abner. And down below at the bottom, I have a copy of it. Should Abner have died as the lawless die? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. You fell as one falls before the wicked. So in that lament, who's the wicked person there? Who did he fall before? David's nephew, Joab. Okay. And all the people wept over him again. So David is, again, this is like the political sense of David. He is going all out. And I'm not saying he's not sad or distraught over the death of Abner. Okay. But I mean, he's making sure everybody knows that he had nothing to do, that this is a terrible thing to have happened, because, you know, it was all working out right. Great. David was going to be king. Everything was going to be fine. And now this is a complication in the process. Then they came and urged David to eat something while it was still day. But David took an oath, saying, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun sets. Okay. I think if you remember, one of Saul's things was he liked to take these vows of not eating. And so maybe he's like, listen, I'm not even going to eat. I am just so distraught over this. I'm not going to eat over this so that I can focus on mourning the loss of Abner. Okay, this is how much this distracts, or this, how much this pain this is causing me. Okay. And then we see in verse 36, all the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people there and all Israel knew that the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. So for lack of a better word, it worked. Okay. Again, I'm not saying, but it's clear that he's making sure. Now, this is one of these things. All of these deaths benefit David. Okay. Because, it's conceivable that once David became king of Israel, he would have to deal with Abner as the kingmaker kind of thing. There's a great scene in Richard III, great Shakespeare play, where Richard comes to the throne through nefarious means, and largely through the assistance of one character, the Duke of Buckingham. And he keeps asking the Duke of Buckingham to do things, and it getting progressively worse and worse and worse and worse. And at one point he says, I believe his request is, hey, I need you to get rid of the princes in the tower. If you know, kind of thing. I need you to go kill these two boys. And Buckingham says, well, give me a day to think about it. And Buckingham comes back, and Buckingham suddenly demands. He says, or he doesn't demand. He just says, you know what? I can't do that. Why don't you just give me what you said you'd give me, and I'll leave you alone. And Richard III's great line is, I'm not in the giving vein today, kind of thing. He has to deal with this guy who put him into office, and he kills him. So sooner or later he would have had to have dealt with Abner. So this does clear that obstacle out of the way. Okay, but it didn't have to go this way. It was going to, who knows what would have happened to Abner? Maybe something else. Maybe he would have died. Remember what David said about Saul. He's going to die in battle, the Lord's going to take him, or he's going to die of old age. One of those three is going to happen. Okay, maybe one of those three would have happened. Okay, so, but then in verse 38, then the king said to his men, do you not realize that a commander and a great man has fallen in Israel this day? And I today, though I am the anointed king, I am weak. And these sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds. Okay, so he calls down this curse on Joab and his family. He identifies him with the wicked. He says here he's evil, that he's an evildoer with evil deeds. Okay, but the bottom line here is David never substantively deals with Joab. He never really punishes Joab. Joab is around for the rest of David's career as king. Joab outlives David. I mean, he's his nephew, so theoretically he's younger. Okay, but he never really substantively deals with with Joab. And he can't. He says, these sons of Zeruiah, these nephews of mine, the sons of my sister. And it kind of gives you the indication that when it comes to his own family, David has a hard time dealing with them. Okay? He's done a lot. He's called on a curse, a great curse. I'm going to put it on the back of my business card. People want to call me here. Read that. This is what I hope you know. But he doesn't remove him from his position. Somebody comes in and lies about killing King Saul, he has him killed right away without thinking about it. Somebody kills a great man and a commander, he's like, oh, I hope bad things happen to you, but you're going to keep your position, you're going to keep your power, you're going to keep your authority, you're going to continue to be on a first name basis with me, you're going to continue to be my right-hand man. Okay? So David doesn't deal well with his own family. Okay? And this is really going to come back to haunt him later. Okay? Really, really, really going to come back to haunt him later. This inability. I don't know what David should have done. Should he have killed Joab? I don't know. Locked him up, removed him? I don't know. But, it does indicate something about David that, dude, maybe you should have locked down a little harder on that. But, so, let's see. Where did I end up here? David sings a lament for Abner. David never substantively deals, i.e. punishes Joab. David sings a lament for Abner. David fasts over the death of Abner. David's actions work. All the people took note, and were pleased. Okay, and David seems to recognize in verse 38 and 39 that there are limits to his power. He says, even though he says at the end of 38, even though I'm the king, I'm weak. I couldn't stop this. I can't really, all I can do is make a show of his death. I couldn't really stop it. I can't really punish because these guys are too powerful for me. And there is that to say. Joab is also an influential, powerful guy as well. And we didn't have the absolute power that we kind of think of when we talk about kings at this time. But still, verse, may the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds. Okay. There's still one more person in the way. Let's see what happens to him. Any questions at this point? Any questions, comments, complaints, words of wisdom, great thoughts at large? Okay. Chapter 4, beginning with verse 1. When Ishbosheth, son of Saul, heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost courage. Abner was his guy. Okay. The literal word there when he says he lost courage, literally says his hands went slack. Okay, so think about that. You're having if you see somebody in a conversation, you see them doing this, and then all of a sudden they do this. Did this guy just get encouraging news? Okay, no, it's like, oh, that's not. His hands went slack. They lost courage. He's like, oh no, maybe Ishbosheth knew he was doomed. Maybe Ishbosheth knew that this wasn't going to last. Maybe he thought because he is the legitimate king. He's the son of Saul, so he's in the kingly line. Okay. When Ishbosheth, son of Saul, heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost courage, and all Israel became alarmed. Well, of course they became alarmed. Okay. Abner had come in and said, listen, David is going to take care of us. David is our future. David is the guy. Everything is great. I'm on Team David. And the next thing you know is you find out that David's nephew killed him. Would you be alarmed? Yeah, I'd be alarmed. I'm like, wait a minute. Are they really on our side here? Now Saul's son had two men who were leaders of raiding bands. One was named Baanah and the other Rechab. They were sons of Rimmon the Beerothite from the tribe of Benjamin. Beeroth is considered part of Benjamin because the people of Beeroth fled to Gittim and have resided there as foreigners to this day. So these two guys are basically adopted Benjaminites. Okay, they're considered part of the tribe of Benjamin. They're like immigrants to the tribe of Benjamin, but they have been kind of grafted in. They're part of the tribe of Benjamin. They're considered to be Benjamin. So the writer tells you that these two guys exist, right? And then interestingly, he just throws in this parenthetical statement here in verse 4. Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but as she hurried to leave, he fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth. Okay. Just by the way, there's another descendant. Okay, so there's somebody else out there. This isn't the end of Saul's line. Okay, so Ishbosheth is not the last hope for the Saul's line. There is another. Okay, but it just kind of stuck there. Now, part of this is this statement, because then we go back to talking about Rechab and Baanah. It just goes back to talking about these two guys, and it's just kind of thrown in. One idea is that this is like equidistant between David's complete takeover of the kingdom, or his when Mephibosheth comes back, because Mephibosheth comes back a couple more times. I mean, one of Mephibosheth's stories is a very common sermon topic. His last one, not so much. Okay, but he does come back again near the end. But it's interesting. So, and then it equidistance from there, and David's promise to Jonathan. Remember, Samuel is one book. So if you were to like put a pin in where Samuel or where David promises Jonathan he'll take care of his family, and where David actually helps Mephibosheth, this is like right in the middle. Take that for what it's worth. I mean, to me, it's a coincidence, but but it's oddly placed. Okay, it's oddly placed there. It says, meanwhile, Ishbosheth has lost courage, hands went slack. Ishbosheth has two guys, Baanah and Rechab, who are leaders of his raiding parties. Now, who else is a leader of a raiding party that we just heard about? Joab. Okay, so both Joab and Ishbosheth had these raiding parties, kind of go out. So what that means is they're fighters. They're used to going out in small groups and doing battle, coming back, grabbing plunder, bringing it back, kind of thing, right? So we get back to this story, and it says, now Rechab and Baanah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, set out for the house of Ishbosheth, and they arrived there in the heat of the day while he was taking his noonday rest. Now, there's an interesting textual story here, and that is that in the, I think it's in the Septuagint, there's like an additional line that there's a guard who's watching the house, but because it was so warm, the guard was asleep. Okay, there's an extra, so depending on what translation you have, you may have a note at the bottom where it says something to that effect. But one of the transcripts has this, there's a sleeping guard out front. Okay, regardless of how they get around that guard, they went into the inner part of the house as if to get some wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and his brother Baanah slipped away. They had gone into the house while he was lying on the bed in his bedroom. After they stabbed and killed him, they cut off his head. Okay, which is also what happened to Saul, if you remember. His head went one way and his body went the other. Taking it with them, they traveled all night by way of the Arabah, which is this valley that runs north and south next to the Dead Sea. They brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron and said to the king, here is the head of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, your enemy, who tried to kill you. This day the Lord has avenged my lord the king against Saul and his offspring. Okay, so if you turn over, so B&R, what I affectionately call them, take it upon themselves to betray Ishbosheth and to murder, assassinate him. Okay, he's asleep. You know, brave guys, right? They go in while he's asleep, they stab him in the stomach, they decapitate him, they grab his head, and they race to David. Okay, they decapitate him and carry his head to David. Okay, now my question here is, what were they thinking? What were they thinking? Well, pardon? They're heroes. Yeah. You know, we knew Abner said that David was going to be king. We're going to fix this up. We're going to help this thing along. And again, this is an interesting, you know, here these guys trying, you know, now I'm sure they thought, just like the Amalekite who comes to David, thought, hey, I'm going to get a lot out of this. Okay, I'm going to get a huge reward, because why wouldn't the king be happy to see the dead body of the guy? Now, we know that somebody had come to David and I believe lied about killing Saul. And what does David do to that guy? He kills him, has him killed, kills him. Okay. And David asks these guys this question. It's like, do you have you not heard of my reputation or anything? He says, David answered Rechab and his brother Baanah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, as surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of every trouble. Okay. Which I think this is, I think he's pointing out here, whether they're getting the point or not, I don't need your help. Okay. David didn't need their help. Okay. David didn't need Joab's help. Okay. In fact, David probably didn't need Abner's help, but I mean, it was going to happen. It was going to happen peacefully. Nobody was going to have to be murdered or assassinated. It would have happened peacefully if just the people around him would have let it alone. Okay. But he says, as surely as the Lord lives, when someone told me Saul is dead and thought he was bringing good news, so far they're like, so far it's great, right? Hey, I just want you to know, this has happened to me before. Somebody came, told me somebody had died. It really helped me. And they're probably, emptying their wallets, getting their pocket, wondering where their new plan is going to be. I seized him and put him to death in Ziklag. That was the reward I gave him for his news. Okay, now again, what did the Amalekite have? The Amalekite had a crown and an armband. Okay, and again, there's the two different stories. So we believe that the Amalekite came upon the body of Saul, grabbed the thing. Okay, and I believe the Amalekite lied about killing Saul. And David killed the guy for lying and taking credit for killing Saul. These guys are holding Ishbosheth's head. Ishbosheth is David's brother-in-law. Okay, David spent a lot of time in the kingdom of Saul. I'm guessing now, again, I'm not saying that heads don't change appearance when they're decapitated and all, but I don't know that for a fact. Never really been in the presence of a decapitated head. Just, maybe the shrunken heads at the Field Museum. I don't know. How did I get off on this? But whatever. David knows that's the head of Ishbosheth, right? There's no question that these guys are involved in the death. So if I were going to kill somebody for lying about it, what am I going to do for somebody who actually did it? So David gave an order to his men, and they killed them. They cut off their hands and feet and hung the bodies by the pool in Hebron. And they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in Abner's tomb at Hebron. Okay, so they're making a serious point here. Okay, I don't need your help. Okay, cut off your hands. I don't need you to run messages like this to me. Cut off your feet. Cut off the head. Okay, I don't need this help. So both of these guys are killed, and now David has to distance himself from the death of Ishbosheth. Okay, it's like, it'd be so great if I didn't have all this help, kind of thing. Okay. It's interesting. There's a couple of questions here. They took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in Abner's tomb at Hebron. Okay, that brings two questions. Why would they put Ishbosheth's head in Abner's tomb? Well, they're the same family. It's a family. It's probably a family, considered a family tomb. However, the problem is, why does he have a tomb in Hebron? Because Abner is from Benjamin. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm like, well, why is Abner buried? I mean, maybe he's trying to honor him by giving him this tomb in Hebron. I don't know, but it's like, okay, we're gonna, and I guess he probably went through the same machinations or things to make sure he was distanced from the death of Ishbosheth. But I think at this point, Abner's same family-wise, looking at my note here, okay, I think by this point, Ishbosheth is a minor player, because there doesn't seem to be that much of a uproar over the death of Ishbosheth. Because in chapter 5, any questions yet before you slide into chapter 5? See how much ground I'm covering today? See? Just flying through. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns." You know, if only there was a song they could sing that kind of repeated that. Maybe something along the line of Saul has killed his thousands, David has killed his tens of thousands. Okay? And Saul was upset about that because the message that was being given is just this one right here. Saul was the king, but you were the one doing the leading. And the Lord said to you, "You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler." Okay? Now, this is another one of those extra biblical sort of things. So we don't have a phrase where we see God talking to, or Samuel talking to David saying, "You will be the shepherd." But that would resonate with David because David's background is as a shepherd. Okay? You will be a shepherd over, and you will become their ruler. So the people of Israel, now maybe they realize Ishbosheth is dead, Abner is dead, we're in trouble. We gotta lock this down. We gotta figure this out. Okay. So you a shepherd, and then in verse 3, when all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed King David king over Israel. So there's an interesting thing here. So the people of Israel, maybe there's a big procession, maybe there's a big crowd, maybe, I don't know, all the people come in and say, "You're going to be the king. You're going to be the king. You're going to be the king." And then the elders get together and say, "You're going to be the king." And they're going to anoint, the elders of Israel going to anoint him, and they anoint him king over Israel again, because he's already been anointed king over Israel. Now, the interesting comparison is, especially coming out of Easter, is to think about what happened to Jesus the last week of his life. When he did the triumphal entry, what were the crowds of the people of Israel shouting? "You will be the king. Hosanna to the king. You will be the king. You will be the king. You will be the king." Did the elders of Israel come to him and anoint him king? No. The elders of Israel got together with the chief priests and the teachers of the law and figured out a way to, hey, we need to get rid of this guy. So David got the popular support, and then the leaders came in and said, okay, Jesus came in, had the popular support, but the majority of the leaders never came in, which is why when it's interesting as you go through the Gospels, you kind of get to, you see these big crowd scenes and things like that. It's just pay attention to what the Gospels say about what the leaders are doing. Okay, because there's always just these small little phrases in the Gospels that, the chief priests and the elders left. We talk about, like, you think like the raising of Lazarus. There's this great story, right? But it all comes down to this last paragraph, or this last line of the story of the raising of Lazarus in John chapter 11, where it says, the chief priests and the elders all got together after that and realized they needed to kill Jesus. After that kind of thing. David didn't have that problem. The elders of Israel supported him. David was 30 years old when he became king. Not bad. Accomplished quite a bit. I don't know, Enrique, what did you accomplish by the time you were 30? Anything? Anything like this? I'm looking at you because I got nothing. I don't, I managed to get married. I don't know. But by the time I was 30, I'm like, yeah, this guy, he's gone through, all of this has happened before he's 30. Okay. So, then it says in Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem, he reigned over all Israel and Judah for 33 years. So in total, David was king for about 40 years. Again, don't get hung up on the numbers here. About 40 years. Saul was king for about 40 years. Solomon was king for about 40 years. Okay, so the length of the United Kingdom was 120 years, kind of thing. Actually, 120, because there's 7 years where it's not in the middle there. But regardless, so he reigned over all Israel and Judah for 33 years. Real quick, let me run through the next section here. David, well, let's see. They decapitated him. Compare the Amalekite with R&B. The former lies. The latter actually murders Ishbosheth. David becomes king over all Israel in 2 steps. First, all the tribes come to him, then all the elders come to David and anoint him king. Okay, some see this, I want to make this point. Some see this, 4:6, as the end of the and the word here, this is your vocabulary word for the day. Pericope. 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 Okay, a pericope. I checked this. I'd read that and I'd say pericope, but it's like no, it's pronounced pericope. I checked this. Google is my friend, but a pericope is a unit. It's a story. And so when you're looking at Old Testament stories in particular, and a narrative really, the assumption is not so much that the writer sat down at the beginning and wrote, started from chapter 1 and wrote all the way through, but that they collected stories and put them together, kind of thing. And sometimes it's very clear where the story ends, and sometimes there's these major discussions on where the pericope ends. But it's part of Old Testament theology and Old Testament distinctives is when people talk about the pericope. What is the story unit? Especially it gets into oral criticism, where you look at what was the oral story behind the text, which is interesting. I mean, the text is what we believe is inspired, so that's what matters. And it's kind of an interesting to see what story was being. And sometimes you'll see 2 stories where it seems like they repeat something, where the same phrase is repeated twice. Like, well, why is it repeated? Well, it's because this is one story and this is another story. So if you go through Genesis, you see Genesis, this is the account of this. There's a series of accounts. It just says, this is this story, this is this story. It's a collection of stories. So some have looked at this and said, this is the end of the pericope of David becoming king, because David is now king. Others look at it and say it's at the end of 10, once he gets into Jerusalem. Okay, just, again, this is, to me, it's an interesting thought experiment. Take it for what it's worth, but just so when you're reading, when you guys go out and buy the technical commentaries now and it talks about the pericope, you'll know. You go, oh yeah, we talked about that. Don't remember anything about it, but we talked about it, kind of thing, okay? So 6 minutes after. So next week, we'll talk about David conquering Jerusalem. And that's got another interesting, I don't want to go, because that's got another interesting discussion about textual variances and things like that and all that we have to go on. So any questions? I made it to chapter 5, verse 4. That's not bad. Any questions? David's the king. Long live the king. Yay. He's the king. So this is the end of the beginning. Now he's the king. Okay. We have a couple of chapters where David is pretty much on game, and then it pretty much all falls apart. But we'll get to that when we get to it. Any questions? All right. Thank you very much. See you guys next week.
Mine stays on 59.
Yeah.